Okay, so welcome to this Department of Educational Research seminar. It's important that you're aware that this seminar is being recorded and will be shared with will be shared after the event. So just be aware of that. During the presentation, please make sure your camera is switched off and your microphone is muted. During that presentation, if you have particular comments or thoughts, then please place those in the chat. And when we move on to the discussion part of the seminar, I'll use the questions in the chat, as well as asking people to raise their hands if they want to ask a question themselves. I hope that's all clear. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Sapna Dileesh to give us the seminar. Sapna is doing a PhD with us in the department, and I'm Sapna's supervisor. As well as doing her PhD, Sapna also works at the Oman Dental College. And the focus of this seminar is on, as you can see on the screen, it's being an academic, perceptions of expatriate academics, and Sapna's in the interesting position of writing about expatriate academics while also being one herself. In terms of where Sapna is on her PhD, she's just recently submitted her thesis, so she's in the process of waiting for a viva, and in a way, giving this seminar is really useful preparation for her viva. And what I'd kind of encourage you to do is to kind of recognize the stage Sapna's at in the questions you ask, and think about questions that might be helpful for Sapna in thinking about and preparing for her viva, as well as asking questions of interest in terms of the research. So I think that's quite enough from me. I'm now delighted to ask Sapna to present her seminar. So over to you, Sapna.
Thank you so much, Paul. So good afternoon, everyone. So as Paul said, the seminar is on my PhD thesis. And in my thesis, I'm looking at the perceptions of expatriate academics as to how they view themselves as an academic. And as Paul mentioned, I'm at the stage where I've just submitted my thesis and I'm awaiting my viva. So the journey isn't over as yet, but I'm at a good place, I think, and it's a good feeling. I can see the end, the light at the end of the tunnel. So let's start then. I'm happy to expand on anything and respond to questions at the end. So I'll just start off by giving you an overview of my presentation. So I'll talk about the motivation, the rationale, and the context of my study. Then I'll look at relevant literature, moving on to the research questions, methodology, the outcomes. But I will only be looking at the outcomes pertaining to my research, my first research objective. And then I'll look at the implications and some of the challenges that I faced while doing this. Now, looking at the motivation for the study, so I'm going to basically talk about what was my personal and professional motivation. And the context of the study is quite specific for me because I originate from India and I have been in Oman for 11 years. So I immigrated for professional purposes. And so the experience has been both rewarding and challenging for me. And I've gained some really good insights into teaching and learning in an Arab culture. So at some point, this kind of led me to think about what does it mean to be an academic and expatriate one at that. Yeah, so I was interested to understand if academics construct a singular or static meanings of being an academic, or are they constantly negotiating and constructing their academic identities. So that is what prompted me to undertake this study. Then, so this whole process actually kind of got me thinking, and it foregrounded questions like, what does it mean to be an academic? It was a reflective process of sorts for me as well, because who or what are the factors that influence my perception of being an identity? And that that kind of spurred me on to look at how my fellow academics think of themselves as an academic working in Oman. Moving on to the rationale for the study. So expatriate academics are becoming more and more important, in higher education, because of the university's need to develop an internationalization agenda. So what's happening now is that the expansion of the higher education in GCC countries or around the world is basically outpacing the number of qualified academic staff, and it is leading to increased student-teacher ratios, as well as the hiring of less qualified professionals. And that's where expatriate academics come in. And because although expatriate academics have gained traction and are increasingly becoming important for universities in the globalized era, but they are an under-researched phenomenon, especially in educational research. So there have been studies that have looked at them, in like management studies and specifically speaking business management, but they are relatively under-researched in education research. And of course, the academic environment in GCC countries is quite different to those of Western countries. So academics working in GCC countries are often found to have less job autonomy. They have fewer opportunities to participate in academic governance. They don't have a tenure system. And most of the higher education institutions in the Middle East are quite teaching focused as opposed to research focused. And so the academics are not in a position to kind of deploy some of the research skills that they have developed along the way. So in that sense, the academic environment in GCC countries is quite different. And then, of course, academic identity is important because it is tied to the well-being and productivity of academics. It has a positive influence on how they think of themselves, how it relates to their teaching, their job satisfaction, their retention, and of course, it all boils down to student learning. Okay, so that was the rationale for the study, and that's why I thought it was important to look at how expatriate academics construct their identity or develop their identity. Moving on, it's the context of the study. So the study is based in an Omani private higher education institution. It has about 1,500 students, and it approximately has 150 academic staff. And so it's got a relatively high percentage of expatriates working there. We've got around 40% of expatriate academic faculty there. So that is why I chose this particular higher education institution. And it is also one of the top tier, higher education institutions in Oman, and it offers, undergraduate, postgraduate, and other professional programs across disciplines. So, so that is the case study institution. Now, I'm just going to touch upon some relevant literature. So I'm not going to go into too much detail here. I'll just outline some of the research trends, main research trends pertaining to expatriate academics and academic identities. So as I mentioned, although expatriate academics, are quite relevant in higher education, they are vastly under researched. And literature has shown that most of the studies on expatriate academics have focused on areas such as what are their motivations to expatriate. So we've got Richardson and McKenna, Selmer and Loring, just to name a few, who have looked at that. And then we've got their experiences of expatriation. We've also got studies looking at how they adjust to the host country, and how is their work environment. We've got their career and workplace experiences, and what are the challenges that are faced by them. And so we've got Romanowski and Nasser, who have done a study on expatriate academics in Qatar, and they've looked at some of the challenges that these expatriate academics have faced. So I will touch upon that a little later. So these are some of the studies about expatriate academics. Then we're looking at academic identity. So academic identity is basically the representative of an individual's subjective experiences, their commitments, their values, and their affiliations. Their affiliations to research or to teaching, and then you are contextualizing them in light of the changes that are occurring in higher education at both the national and the international levels. Coming on to some literature regarding academic identity. So most of it has tended to focus on teaching or researcher identities, and in my study I've argued that we have a wider set of academic identities, which I will come to later. And then also we've got factors that influence or impact academic identity, and we've got studies that have looked at identifying with an academic tribe or a discipline as influencing academic identity by Beecher and Trawler, and of course we've had Trawler, Saunders, and Bamber, Henkel looking at that. And then we've got their discipline and their and their institutions as influencing their academic identity. Also, there have been studies that have looked at career stage as influencing academic identity. So we've had Archer in 2008, Churchman and King in 2009, and Fitzmaurice in 2013. And then even Sue Clegg has looked at gender, class, and family as impacting academic identity. So after reviewing the literature pertaining to expatriate academics and academic identity, I came up with 3 research questions. And my main objective, or the core argument, was to understand the complex nature of how expatriate academics identify themselves as academics. So that was the first question. So the second one was, what are the expatriate academics' perceptions of how their understanding of being an academic has changed over time? So I just wanted to investigate how their idea, or whether they feel that their sense of being an academic has changed over time. And last but not the least, I wanted to understand what are the factors that influence identities of expatriate academics, and how these factors help in the construction of their identities. Now, moving on, I'm just going to briefly touch upon the theoretical framework that I've used in the study, and this is the identity trajectory framework developed by McAlpine and Associates. And so this framework is basically applied, by looking at the outcomes and during data analysis. So I'm just going to talk about the three dimensions, or the three strands of the identity trajectory. And just to give you an overview of that. So the first one is the individual dimension. So it's basically looking at the intellectual affiliations of an individual. So it could be, their relation to their professional practice, to teaching, to research, or to leadership. It could also be contributions that they have made in their disciplinary fields, or leading to publications or citations, or curriculum design, and so on and so forth. Then moving on to network. So network basically looks at an individual's connection, and the local, national, and international networks that individuals have. And so it could be networks that are within the department, within faculties, within institutions, or it could be at an international level, or it could be just discipline focused. So it's networks that individuals develop. And then looking at the third strand, we have the institutional strand, and this is very important because it can either support or constrain an individual's networking and in intellectual strands. So by what do we mean by the institutional strand? It looks at the institution and what are the resources that are provided by the institution to the individual. For example, the job, the roles, the kind of income, funding, time for teaching, for research, or professional development, and these kind of things. So that's why I said the institutional strand is quite important, because it can either support or it can constrain the other two strands in this framework. Now, moving on to the methodology. So ontologically, my argument is that we socially construct reality, and the social world is produced and reproduced interactionally. Epistemologically, I believe that we construct our own individual understanding and knowledge through our own unique lived experiences and reflections of that experience. So the research design is that of a case study, and I thought it was more suitable as it allowed for interviewing expatriate academics within a bounded setting. And it helped me to get an in-depth understanding of the situation. In order to generate data, I used semi-structured interviews, and I thought semi-structured interviews were suitable and apt because it would help me to get deep and rich qualitative data. and it would help me to capture, how the interviewees understand their experiences and their lived world. One thing that came into the study, which I don't think, even my colleagues on the program would have anticipated, was COVID-19. So due to COVID-19, I had to make some changes. I had actually planned for face-to-face interviews, semi-structured interviews, but I was able to conduct 3 pilot interviews face-to-face, after which I had to switch to Zoom to conduct the interviews virtually. Moving on, this is just some information about the participants. So I had 18 participants in the study, and I had 10 men and 8 women. Majority of them were between the ages of 25 and 50, and most of the participants in the study were mid-career participants. Mid-career academics, they hailed from different countries, but most of them were from Asian countries. Now, to analyze the data, I used thematic analysis, and I followed the 6 steps of thematic analysis that has been outlined by Brown and Clark. And so what I did was I familiarized myself after transcribing the interviews. I read and reread and familiarized myself with the material. After that, I identified sections of the text that I thought were relevant to the research objectives. And then I added labels, and then I was able to develop core clusters, and from there I was able to develop sub-themes and themes and sub-themes and patterns. And apart from doing this manually, I also used Excel just to check and validate if I'm on the right track, and I found that quite useful. Now, moving on, I'm just going to just give you an overview of the outcomes of the study. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to focus mainly on the outcomes related to the first research question or objective, and which is what are their perceptions of being an academic. So I'm looking at from the data generated, I was able to identify that the academics were able to reflect 4 core academic identities, and that's of a traditional teacher, integrated academic, academic freelancer, and academic leader. So now I'm just going to go into a little more detail in the next slides on these 4 core identities. And I'll have a few quotations just to illustrate the main themes as reflected by the expatriate academics. So we have identity as a traditional teacher. So I basically had 6 participants who were mainly early career and mid-career academics who reflected the identity of a traditional teacher. And all these academics basically spoke about being an academic in terms of being proud. They showed a lot of commitment, and being a teacher was like the bedrock of their identity. So you can see they were passionate about teaching, so they had a passion for teaching. Which is kind of illustrated in this in what Umar says. So teaching is my thing. It's what I enjoy the most. I think I'm a really good teacher. It's been my passion for as long as I can remember. Then, of course, one of the things that that stood out for these traditional teachers was that they were more teaching centered. They had a more teaching centered approach to teaching and learning, wherein they felt that they needed the students to understand the learning objectives rather than help them being autonomous learners. So it was more of, I don't like to use the term, but it was basically a lot of spoon feeding, so to speak, is what came across in the conversations. So so they had a more teaching centered approach to teaching. And then they did also talk about lack of time for research. So they were keen on undertaking research, but they felt quite bogged down by administrative work and other related work. And they felt that this did not allow them to undertake research, and that they felt that they were stuck. They were not able to grow as an academic. But again, they felt that their bedrock was teaching was their bedrock, and that was the most important thing for them. They also enjoyed developing a good rapport with their students, so they felt developing an informal rapport with the students and getting that acknowledgement from their students was positively reinforced their identity as a teacher, and that was very important for them. So Salma, when asked on who do you think is an academic, so she felt that an academic is someone who's caring, supportive, understanding, and responsive to the needs of the students, someone who knows their students well. So that's the traditional teacher there. Then we have identity as an integrated academic. So we have 3 late career academics who describe themselves as integrated academics. And what was very obvious with these three participants was that in their teaching role and the responsibility, it is congruent with their research expertise. So they felt that research was very, very important to them. So they were researchers first and then teachers second. So they were research oriented, and so research was more important for them. Research got them excited and happy, as opposed to, compared to teaching. Then we've got a different approach here to teaching and learning. So they were more student-centered. They had a more student-centered approach, and they aimed to develop autonomous learners, students who took ownership for their learning. They also wanted students to be inquirers and undertake research. So they were looking at transferring knowledge and preparing students, but they wanted students to take ownership for that. Then, of course, they were also characterized by this need to be known in the research community. So they felt that it was very important to be well known in their subject area. They thought it helped them gain academic currency to move, nationally and internationally within their academic circles. So to be well known in the research community through publications and through research was one of the things that they wanted to do and took pride in. And then, of course, they were collaborators. They had a very collegial relationship with their colleagues, and they wanted to collaborate with their peers, so that they could contribute to their disciplines and to research. Moving on to identity as an academic freelancer. So basically we have 5 participants who kind of looked at, who reflected the identity as an academic freelancer, and they were mainly early career, mid-career academics. So what was distinguishing about these participants was that they had a very strong professional background. They had professional knowledge, they had a professional background, and they took pride in transferring their professional knowledge of their professional practice into their teaching and bringing that into the classroom. So they took pride in having that practical knowledge, and they thought that was more important than having academic qualifications. So next, they were also revenue generators, because most of them have come from a practical field. I have here an example where she was in HR, and then she moved into teaching, and she conducts, of course, she teaches management subjects, but she also conducts corporate trainings and short courses for the college. And one of the good things about this is that she is able to generate money for the institution. So she is able to kind of dabble in both academia as well as trainings, corporate trainings. So she's got her foot in two wells, so to speak. And of course, they think of themselves as professional experts. So they still think of themselves as a practitioner. And they think that brings in credibility into their teaching. And they think that is more important than having academic qualifications or like a master's or a PhD. They think this gives them credibility with their students. Next, we are looking at academic leaders. So basically, we just have 3 participants here, and they were mid-career academics, and they have, over the course of their employment with the college, and also through their career, have occupied, leadership roles, and they take that role quite seriously. And they think of themselves as strategic planners. So they are involved in, making strategic decisions regarding the programs they are heading, or the department, contributing to the vision and mission of the higher education institution. And their style of leadership is transformational, because they don't. It's more inclusive, and they want to build a strong team. They don't want to be viewed as this standoffish line manager who's not approachable. So they want to build a strong team and help the team achieve certain goals. And they think of themselves as torchbearers. Basically, they view themselves as spokespersons of the college. So they kind of take it upon themselves to be representatives of the college, both nationally and internationally. And of course, there was one exception in my study who actually did not reflect any of the above four identities. And the person actually expressed disaffection and disappointment, and viewed teaching just as a job, and did not find any joy or any motivation in it. And it just helped him earn his bread. So that was his point of view. Now, I'm just going to look at this just very briefly, because I'm just looking at factors influencing academic identities. So this is, I'm looking at research question 3, but I just wanted to show you how I mapped, the different themes and then came up with this whole. So just to give you an idea, what I found was that the integrated academics and the academic freelancers basically relocated to Oman in search of better career prospects or opportunities. And we can see that the experiences of expatriation for the integrated academics was one of resilience. So what we can see is that these academics developed a sense, they've been able to adapt to the environment quite well, and they have been able to adjust to what is expected of them, working in this higher education institution. Whereas academic freelancers, they expressed a sense of disengagement. And what came across was that it was like a coping mechanism for them to just avoid disappointment in their job.
Sapna, sorry to interrupt, but I think a few of us, all right, it's changed now. We couldn't see that whole slide, but we can now. Thank you.
Oh, can you? All right, okay. So do you want me to go over that again, Paul?
I think it's fine. I think if you just leave that slide up for a minute, just so people can have a look at that, because I think certainly me and Rebecca could only see half of it for when you were talking about it. But we
all right. Now, all right, okay. So basically, this slide is just looking at the factors influencing the academic identities. So it shows how I've mapped the motivations and the experiences of these academics to their core academic identities. I hope it's okay to move on.
Yeah, that's fine, Sapna.
All right, thank you. So what are the main contributions here in the study? So basically, it shows that there's a variation in identities apart from those of teachers and researchers. So specifically speaking, we've got academic practitioners or freelancers, and then we've got academic leaders. Also, adding to the literature on expatriate academics, here I'm looking at how factors like motivation to expatriate or to relocate and the ensuing experiences have influenced academic identity construction. And another thing was that when I was looking at the data, I was able to understand that what's happening is that the academic identities, the expatriate academics have these core identities, and they are actually building and expanding on these core academic identities. So that is something that came through in the study. And something that was positive that came out of the study was that the narratives of the expatriate academics were more agentic, and they were positive, as opposed to some studies especially in the GCC, they tended to posit a pessimistic view of their experiences. So here, my academics were more positive in their views. Moving on to implications. So I hope the findings from the study will help expatriate academics to grow and thrive in their academic professions, because I hope higher education institutions will reimagine an environment where expatriate academics are offered time and space to develop their intellectual affiliations and orientations, and that they feel valued, so that they can do well in academia. Another thing is maybe consider international experience as a hiring criterion, because sometimes some of the academics that I interviewed spoke about having international experience as a bit of a handicap, and so it would be good if it's looked upon as a positive and as a hiring criterion. Then I think I am hoping that the study will be useful for academics who have expatriated or are considering expatriation. This brings me to the last slide, which is basically challenges that I faced. What tends to happen is that academics, or for that matter, anyone working in the GCC region, they tend to self-censor and are quite circumspect, in their views about politics, because they fear, because of the fear of political censure. So initially, I thought that some of the academics, were a bit guarded during their interviews, and they were not openly airing their views. And but I kind of mitigated that by making them more comfortable, providing them with confidentiality and anonymity in their responses, and then also, of course, going back and showing them the transcripts and getting their approvals on that. So
hi Sapna, some of your slides, I think your slides got stuck again, so if you could just
have they
them again. I think so, yeah, that's better.
All right, so then I will just stop sharing, Paul, and then I will start again. Is that okay? All right,
yeah, that's fine.
Is that okay, Paul?
Yeah, that looks good to me, Sapna.
All right. Sorry about that. I don't know what the hiccup is. Sorry. All right. So I was just talking about self-censoring by expatriate academics. And then, as I mentioned earlier, COVID-19, living through the pandemic, and then my data generation was during the lockdown, so I had to resort to Zoom, and some of the participants weren't too comfortable with Zoom, but then before the actual interview, I had to spend some time with them, just make sure that we iron out some of the issues there. And last point that I'd like to mention is about staying focused and motivated. So I think everyone who's been on this journey will have their highs and their dips, and especially with work, with family, and then your thesis. So I'm sure many can relate to that. So what I did was I realized that I work well when I set myself some targets and goals. And so every month I would decide that I'm going to do this. So I broke the whole thing up into small, manageable pieces, so to speak, and I would work towards that. So I would set myself targets, and then I would work towards that. And of course, before setting these targets, I would meet with my supervisor. So that kind of kept me on track. So I would have a meeting with my supervisor at least once in 2 months. So I would keep it once a month or max 2 months, not more than that, because then I would feel like I'm not on track. So that really helped me to stay on track. And I broke it up into small pieces rather than looking at it as a whole, because I found that quite overwhelming, to be very honest. Those are some of the challenges that I could think of. And so that basically brings us to the end of my presentation. So I've just got some references here that I've used, and thank you for your time. I hope you found this useful, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have.
That's great. Thanks ever so much, Sapna, and thanks for giving us such a great insight into both the outcomes of your research and also the process and the challenges of conducting it, as well as coping so admirably with the challenges of Zoom and online presentations and things.
Yes.
I think probably the discussion will work best if you stop sharing your screen, if that's
sure.
okay.
Sure, I will do that. Sure.
That's great.
Yes.
So we now move to questions and discussion. And I think the first question we have is from Panagiotis. Would you like to ask your question? And I hope my pronunciation wasn't too awful.
Me? Hello?
Hello.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
Yes,
Okay,
we can.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, first of all, I'd like to apologize. My first question was a little bit rushed. I was super thrilled by the topic, as I am an expatriate academic myself.
All right.
But now it has kind of changed. It has kind of made me more interested in asking you few small questions. Can I do that?
Sure,
Okay.
please.
The first one is, do you think that this is a more international model, or do you think that it only applies to the GCC or Oman?
I think it can be applied both internationally and in the GCC. Mm-hmm. Because from what I have reviewed in the literature, we do have similar issues, running through the literature. So, of course, I think we can apply a lot of it internationally as well.
Do you think from the table that you presented at some point, the one that we kind of missed and we had to pause for a second there,
right?
You have a list of motivational factors, of factors that motivate people to become expatriate academics, and I'm wondering if you have. If you think, I know that you have focused a lot more on Oman, but I'm just interested again from the literature to see whether you have found anything else. Did you find that the motives or the motivation or whatever you want to call it was a lot different from academics coming into Oman or going to other countries?
Right. See, there were some similarities as well as differences. So some of the similarities were that most of them had come in looking for better career opportunities as their motives. And that was similar to a lot of studies, that were conducted in Asia and, in Europe. But looking at it from the DCC point of view, what was surprising was that most of the academics who immigrated to Middle Eastern countries were mainly motivated by financial reasons. But in my study, the academics did not cite that as their primary motivation. That featured as the second or the third motivator for them. So in the literature, actually, we have I mean, I looked at Richard and McKenna's framework. They're looking at, what are the motivators? So we've got motivations of being an architect, explorer, so on and so forth. So there are a lot of similarities, and my study is building on that. But as well as I can see differences, as I stated, the financial aspect is not as important in my study. I mean, that's what I found in my study.
Okay, good. Do you think
so maybe just one more
too many
question?
questions?
Yeah,
Okay.
well, no, maybe ask one more and then we'll move on to someone else, if that's okay.
Okay, fine. Yes, absolutely. I just wanted to know whether you have seen them moving between the different identities also.
Actually, in my study, I mean, that was the second research objective, which I didn't explain much, but I used the identity trajectory there. And what I saw was that they have these core identities and they're kind of expanding on it, but they're not moving between these. So they're expanding on their core academic identities, or they're kind of consolidating that identity is what I observed.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I only have one more. If there's some time at the
Okay, yeah, so we'll come back to you for that final question when we've given other people a chance. And just to let people know, the other way of asking a question, as well as putting it in the chat, is to, under the reactions button, raise your hand and then I'll come to you. Next, we have a question from Pam. Pam, would you like to ask your question?
Hi, thanks very much. Thanks for a great presentation. And I think it's such an important topic because there's so much mobility these days in higher education. So thank you. I just had one question.
Thank you.
Was there any difference between those working sort of in the harder sciences and those more in the softer subjects?
Actually, in this study, I wasn't able to find a major difference between them being in the harder disciplines compared to the softer disciplines.
Thanks.
There was no differentiation there.
Great. Okay. So would anyone else like to raise their hand? Or while you think about that, maybe we'll go back to Panagiotis for his last question.
Oh, sorry.
Do you want to ask?
Sorry.
Sorry.
Am I unmuted?
You are unmuted now, yes.
Okay. Excellent, thank you. The only question the last one that I wanted to ask is, did you only do interviews or did you do observations also?
I did not do observations. That was one of the limitations of my my study. Yeah. Basically, because I would have loved to have done a longitudinal study on hindsight, but I stuck to one-time interviews, and as I said, because of the pandemic and because of the lockdown, I had to make some changes, to that. So I just stuck to interviews.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, but I felt that the interviews gave in-depth, in-depth views of the academics and their lived experiences. So I think I was able to get a lot of rich data there.
Thank you. Good luck with your Viva.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Great. So next we have a question from Kunmi.
Hello. Thank you so much for the presentation. Okay.
Most welcome.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can.
Sorry, I can hear my own echo, so it's a bit disturbing, but I'll go with my question. It's really good to hear that your academics are very positive and they have agency. So I just want you to expand, if that's possible, a little bit about like what it means by agency. A lot of their identity is shaped by their personal motivation, or is really institutional conditions, or what kind of job has been offered there. So is it really them, or is it the choice that they had to make going with the job available at the institution? So that has quite track already kind of decided them. So I was wondering how much, that balance
All right.
between
Yes.
the two is over.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you for that question. So what was, I think, amazing to observe was that they were quite agentic, and they exercised quite a bit of agency, especially when you look at the integrated academics and the academic freelancers. What I saw was that there were certain constraints that they observed, in terms of the institution and the policies, but they were learning and they were exercising the agency to kind of circumnavigate that. And so, for example, the integrated academics undertook research. They applied for funding, although the institution wasn't too supportive. They would collaborate with international researchers. Similarly, we've got the academic freelancers who had, I think I mentioned that, they had one foot in the practice world and one in academia. And they chose to do that, and they continue to choose to do that. And so in that sense, they exercise quite a bit of agency. I hope I've answered your question.
Yeah, it's just really interesting that, it's good to know that there are positive stories, because a lot of kind of research that I've been coming across is quite negative in a way, that a lot of challenge has been talked.
I can understand.
So it's really good to hear
because
that.
It's like a balance. Yeah, thank you. It's like I've got one group who feel they don't have much agency, and that is the traditional teachers. They feel they are constricted and they have a lot of constraints, and they feel, although they love teaching, they would like to take in more research, but then they don't feel they have the necessary support from the institution to do that. So we do have that side as well, where they have less agency, or they exercise less agency. Yes.
That's great. Just looking, were there any more questions? But if there's not, just to give people a bit more time to think, I should kind of ask you the typical kind of Viva question, kind of thinking in the future, which is, so if you were to do the study over again, what would you do differently?
Oh, wow. Okay. I would, first of all, I think I would have a more positive frame of mind and just tell myself that it's going to be fine in the end, and that it's all going to work out. And so, so that would be my advice to myself. And because I all through the process, I unfortunately, there were stages where I didn't enjoy it as much as I would have liked to, I thought. And but I think the whole thing made sense to me while I started writing, and that is when something shifted in my mind, and clarity came in. And I think I need, I would tell myself to just not feel bogged down, and just take it one step at a time. So probably that would be my advice to myself. And I think data analysis was challenging for me. So I went in thinking that it's going to be, it's not going to be too hard, which was an understatement. But I think on hindsight, I did struggle quite a bit with my data analysis, as you know, Paul. So I think I would maybe spend more time, or maybe approach it in a different with a different mindset, while looking at data analysis.
And I think that's not an uncommon experience.
Right.
Often for PhD students, the thing they really worry about is getting their data, and normally there's no issue with that. And the thing they don't think about and don't worry about is the data analysis, and that's the hardest part, because that's where your contribution to knowledge is formed. So it is, that kind of, if it's not challenging, then you're probably doing it wrong. Be my summary. Anyway, Anne-Marie, you had a question in the chat. Would you like to ask that?
Yes, thank you very much indeed, and thank you. I'm afraid I haven't caught all your presentation, but I've caught some of it and I've enjoyed that. And I think I'm just following on from what Paul was saying. I think I facilitate this some study days with a number of PhD students, and that point of analysis and the challenge of it, people go, and I'm still doing some analysis, or and how am I doing, and debates and discussions. So you are definitely not alone in that.
All right.
So be reassured.
Right.
I think in a sense, one of the things that I had with which was sparked off towards the end, and where you were talking about perhaps participants maybe self-censoring, and I wasn't sure whether you were just reporting that you felt they self-censored when they were being interviewed, or whether you were also getting evidence from them that they were self-censoring in their working life, and perhaps opting to do things or not. And the reason I ask for that is that certainly within disability related research, there is this notion of people sort of psychologically excluding themselves from all sorts of things on the basis of having been rejected or being put down on a number of occasions, and therefore they sort of learn that there's no point, or that they don't learn there's no point, but they sort of give up having that sense of view that they can have an agency. So I just wondered if it was, you've got any sort of evidence of how that impacted on their working life, if that makes sense.
I get your point. Yes, thank you for that question. It's very, very interesting. The thing is, the point that I wanted to make there was, as an expatriate working here in Oman, we're not supposed to say certain things. We are expected to be politically correct, or censor what we want to say. So that's the way it is. I mean, it's kind of, I think, expected of all of us here, at least those who are working here. So I had that fear going into the interviews. So initially, I did sense that, they were just giving me, positive answers, or, things that have, that show them in a good light, or the organization in a good light. And that kind of happened during the pilot interviews. So that way it was very, very helpful for me, the pilot interviews. And that's when I thought I need to kind of change the dynamics a little more, make them feel more comfortable. And I noticed that by the second or the third interview, after the first few questions, I felt they settled in. They spoke about, what they felt were the major constraints, or what was holding them back, what are the things that they liked, what they didn't. So I felt that they were not censoring what they were saying to me. So I think I was able to get a balanced view, so to speak.
And just to return to that point, when you were talking to them, they weren't giving you necessarily a they were giving you a balanced view. They were sharing with you their experiences. Did any of their experiences illustrate the fact that in their everyday life they were self-censoring, and did they, based on what you've just said now about the fact that, you know, as an expat you realize what the rules of the game are, well, presumably people have different levels of experience of being an expat. So when you first arrived, were they more or less self-censoring? When they were more experienced expats, were they more or less self-censoring? Did you get any sense of that?
Well, what I noticed was, I mean, interestingly enough, some of the some of the academics who had just recently come into Oman, so there was one, I think 2 academics who had just been in Oman for about 3 years, and they were sort of struggling, you know, looking at it culturally and all of it, and they didn't know how to kind of, what do you say, adapt to the country. So I felt they were a little more vocal about the problems that they were having, as opposed to the long timers who'd been in Oman. And I think part of it was that not because they were self-censoring, but I think they had developed this mechanism to adapt to the country and to the work environment. So, I mean, I would like to think of it that way. I mean, that's what struck me. So the people who had recently come in, I thought were more vocal about it.
Thank you. I'm mindful there are some other questions coming up, so I shall allow you to answer those, but good luck and thank you for today.
Thank you so much.
Marie, so we'll next go to Kaylee. Kaylee, you had a couple of questions, I think.
Yes, thanks, Paul. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was really, really interesting and I really enjoyed it. If possible, 2 questions. First of all, I apologise that I missed the start. So if you already touched upon these things, I'm sorry. But I wondered if gender played any role in the different academic identities that you found.
Well, one of the things that that came out from the data was that I didn't have a major difference between the genders, as you know, as them reflecting a traditional teacher identity or an academic integrated academic or an academic freelancer. But what was striking in the data was that I didn't have any women as academic leaders. So that was one of the things that I noticed, and one of the reasons for that, I guess, is because women generally are not given managerial positions here. So it's more, unfortunately, male dominated. So that was one of the things. Otherwise, I mean, I had more or less the same number of genders in the other identities, reflecting the other identities.
Thank you, that's really interesting. And just a second question, I just wondered how you defined early, middle and late career stages.
Oh, sure, yes, yeah, I did have that information. I actually just need to get, just a minute, please. Sorry, yeah. So what I'd done was that the mid-career academics, I'd taken them as having 10 to 14 years of experience. Early academics, 3 to 6 years, and late career as 15 years and above.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
helps if the chair unmutes themselves when they're trying to make a contribution, so I apologize for that. I think we have another question from Kyung Mi.
Sorry, I didn't mean to really ask with my voice, but I was just wondering how you see yourself, like if you kind of identify different categories, how, you know, what you feel comfortable to be in the future or now.
Oh, now, interestingly enough, I actually come from a professional background into academia. So I used to be in HR, and I spent about 7 years in HR, and then I moved into teaching 11 years ago. So I think I look at myself as an academic freelancer and an academic leader. So, yeah.
Great. So we've got time for a couple more questions or comments if anyone's got anything further. There was also, Sapna, just so you know, there's a lovely note in the chat from Louise, thanking you for the presentation, saying she needs to go, but saying thanks for the great insights and well done on creating the connections to allow participants to feel secure and share their experiences. So
thank you so much. Thank you. Yes, that's really nice. Thank you.
Okay. So any final questions that people have? Okay. I should take that as a no, but you know, that was a really great discussion. And thank everyone for their contributions. And it also speaks highly of the quality of your presentation and the work you've done, Sapna, that there was such a rich discussion afterwards. So really well done. That was absolutely great.
Thank you so much.
So we'll now close the seminar. Just to say at the end that the next online seminar is on Wednesday, the 9th of February. It starts next Wednesday and will be presented by Vicky Hill from the University of the Arts, London. And the title is Belonging Through Assessment, Pipelines of Compassion. So it'd be great if you can join us for that. Thank you all for your contributions. They were great and really engaging. And finally, just to thank Sapna for a really excellent presentation. So thanks everyone and well done, Sapna.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for your time, and thank you for sharing this. Thank you so much. And thank you for the wonderful discussion, everyone. Really enjoyed the questions. And thank you, Dee and Rebecca.